Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name's Nick Oliver. I'm a councillor in Corbridge. Welcome to the first meeting of the Communities in Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee of this new administration. There are some new members here, so what I suggest is we'll just quickly whiz around the room and if everybody could introduce themselves and just basically say who they are and what they do. So we'll start with you, Nicola, and we'll come around this way.
Hello, my name's Nicola Turnbull. I'm one of the Democratic Services officers.
I'm Nick Oliver. I'm the County Councillor in Corbridge.
Sean Nicholson, I'm the Scrutiny Coordinator, responsible for the day-to-day scrutiny function, but I look after this committee and also corporate services.
David Feiger. I'm Environment and Design Team Manager and County Ecologist in the Planning Service.
I'm Julie Dennett-Seal. I'm the Corporate Complaints Manager and I also line manage the Statutory Complaints team as well.
I'm Nick Morfitt. I'm Green Party County Councillor for Humsoft.
Colin Horncastle, Councillor for South Tynedale, and I'm here as the portfolio holder for Community Services.
Mark Mather, the County Councillor for the Wool Award.
Gordon Castle, one of the two County Councillors for Alnwick.
Colin Hardy, Norham Nileshire.
Margaret Richardson, County Councillor for Cupman Ward.
Eileen Corley, County Councillor for Wensleydale Ward and Blythe.
Hi, Rich Wearmouth. I'm the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services and the Deputy Leader.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that was the first meeting. We won't have to do that every time. The first item on the agenda is the terms of reference, and I think as you know, the Scrutiny Committee starting out in a new administration, I think we're just basically here to note these terms of reference. But the point I would make is that this is quite broad, and I think this is an important Scrutiny Committee. And I think what I would like to do is basically, I think as we move forward, I think everybody on this committee needs to be involved, and if anybody has any particular ideas about things that should be brought forward for scrutiny, then please do approach Mark and I as Deputy Chair and Chair, and we'll speak to Sean about that, and we can have a discussion if anybody wants to raise anything at the end of one of the meetings about future scrutiny meetings. I personally, you know, it's a bit of a sort of gamekeeper turned poacher arrangement for me, and but I do value the scrutiny function, and as a cabinet member I did quite enjoy being scrutinised, and I think it's a really important function of the council. So please let's all get involved wholeheartedly and let's scrutinise thoroughly. So anybody on any other comments before we move on to item 2? No, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Chair, I was just going to remind everybody that if they're going to speak, to hold their hands up, and also if they could make sure their microphones are next to them, just so that it's picking up for the live stream. Thank you.
That's great. I'm a very inexperienced chair. It's good to have Nicola sitting beside me. Thank you. Apologies for absence. We have some apologies, Sean, I think. Nicola?
Yes, we've got apologies for absence from Councillors Bridget, Gallagher, Robinson, and also Councillor Riddle, and I think that was 4 there. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. The minutes of the previous 2 meetings, so the minutes of the meeting on the 3rd of February, I think probably it's down to you, Eileen, to approve these, because I think you were probably the only person at that meeting. That's great. Thank you very much. Yes, of course. Fire away.
What it is, Nick, it's on page 3 of the minutes on the 3rd of March. And it's where following comments are made by members. It's like halfway down the page. Yeah? And we have a particular issue where I really would like to see dogs banned from gated sports areas such as tennis courts and things like that. And I have been trying for a while now to actually ask the Cabinet to look at to see if they would actually introduce some kind of policy in council which would stop this happening. I don't think that such a policy exists, apart from the fact there is a policy which stops dogs going into gated play areas, children's play parks. I do think I would really like to see the council look at something like that. I just
Okay.
think it's a really safety issue.
Yeah, no, well, thank you. I think we've got the cabinet member responsible. I think, Colin, I think, were you happy to take that away and look at it?
Well, yeah, I mean, at face value, it makes absolute common sense to think that, you know, you've got dogs going into play areas, you know, looking at the health and hygiene point of view. So it would totally depend on who's responsible for the play areas, whether the county or any
Well,
of the...
it's actually, Colin, it's like the sports areas, like the tennis courts.
Yeah.
And things like that. Children's play areas have a policy in place, I think. I know they're not allowed in, but the dogs are going into enclosed tennis courts and that, and then it's not very nice.
No, it's not good. It's something that we'll have a look at.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, the next item agenda is disclosure of members' interest. Does anybody have any interest to disclose? No, that's great, thank you. And item 5 is the forward plan of cabinet decisions. And I think, Sean, you're going to just give us a quick outline on this.
I need to give you a distinction. This is the forward plan of decisions that are being asked of Cabinet. So it's not your forward plan, it's the Cabinet's. And we bring this forward to the committee really is just to highlight issues that are to be considered by the Cabinet in the future, just in case there are any issues that you feel as though this committee should look at prior to that cabinet decision. The committee's work programme we've got at the end of the agenda. So those issues that have all been picked up, we can talk about at the end of the meeting. But this is purely for information only. It's just to highlight items coming forward to cabinet.
That's great. I would just we've just had a discussion about this in our pre-meet, and I think I'd make 2 points, is that we don't have to scrutinise everything that's coming to Cabinet, because some things will be pretty straightforward and probably not really worthy of scrutiny, but we also don't need to restrict the work of this committee to things that are going to Cabinet. So it's pretty flexible, and we are masters of our own destiny in that respect. So thank you. Item 6, scrutiny of cabinet reports, and the first one is the funding for the areas of natural beauty, and I think David's going to give us a quick outline on this.
Thank you. So areas of outstanding natural beauty, for those who aren't familiar with them, are nationally important landscapes which the council has various legal obligations towards in terms of management plans and conserving and enhancing excuse me, the areas. We have 2 in Northumberland. There's Northumberland Coast, which is a narrow strip of the North Northumberland coast. And then there's the North Pennines, which is a very large area spanning parts of southwest Northumberland, County Durham and Cumbria. The way that the AONB staff teams are funded is DEFRA provides 75% of the funding on condition that the local authorities within whose areas the AONB sits contribute at least 25%. So we've had a process of reviewing that funding once every 3 years. So this paper is just the three-yearly review of that funding. You may have noticed it seems to be a bit late because it applies to this financial year and the subsequent 2 years. The reason for that is we normally hear about our DEFRA settlement in December or January. This year, for various reasons, we didn't actually know our DEFRA settlement until 7th of April. So I wasn't able to complete the report, and then obviously we were into PERDA. So apologies, it's a paper about a financial year that we're already in, but we had that rather unusual circumstance. We are recommending a 10% increase in the funding this year. This will be the first increase since 2007. So I hope you'll agree that that's a modest request, given that period of time.
That's great. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? Gordon.
Just one, because many years on planning, I've noticed on Section 106 agreements that there are frequently money set aside for coastal mitigation purposes. Does this go directly to AONB? Where does it go?
Okay, that's related, but it's a slightly different matter. So all of the Northumberland coast, not just the AONB area, is designated for various features of ecological importance, particularly the bird populations. We have a big issue to deal with in planning when we're looking at planning applications close to the coast, which is that of recreational disturbance. So obviously it's an immensely attractive coast, and quite rightly we promote it as such. But that does create a conflict with the disturbance that inadvertently happens to the bird populations for which the coast is nationally and internationally important. In the past, we've tried to address that indirectly by asking developers to include green space for dog walking and that sort of thing within their developments. But unfortunately, and quite understandably, that doesn't really incentivise people to stay away from the coast, because clearly if you live near the coast, it's a wonderful place to walk and to exercise your dog and so on. So in 2016-17, we were engaged in talks with Natural England, who are the government's, the statutory nature conservation organisation, about how to resolve this. And we established a wardening scheme. So we have wardens who are funded through that contribution, who work with recreational users. So at the moment, for example, they have various nest protection areas on the coast to ensure that nesting birds like ring plovers can raise their young. In the winter, they're working particularly with dog walkers to safeguard the most important areas from disturbance. So that's a way of working to reconcile our aspirations in terms of housing, in terms of tourism, and our obligations to those protected areas. So that's specifically an ecological scheme, whereas the AONB's ecology is an important part, but so is landscape and historic environment and a wider range of things.
I see. So when we see this money going to coastal impact mitigation, we can be sure it's going directly to warden support. That's what you're telling us.
That's right.
Thank
you. Yes. And there's a website called Space for Shorebirds, which is that scheme. So you can see what they're up to.
That's great. That's answered one of my questions as well, which is it plover or plover? Does anybody else have any questions? So I think what we're being asked to is really comment on this, and I guess we're all supporting the recommendations. So that would be
Nick, that just add a few things to what David said. I mean, he's mentioned the two AONBs. The North Pennines is covered by 3 different counties, plus some of the districts in Cumbria. The North Pennines AONB is internationally recognised geoparks. That attracts extra funding, and there's tourism involved with that. But what does the AONB actually do? The AONBs, I'm obviously a lot more familiar with the North Pennines one because I've been involved in it for years, and I'm just getting to grips with the coastal one. So the North Pennines one, what to do is, I mean, this goes towards the councils and the government's green agenda, which is becoming more and more important as time goes on. I mean, the North Pennines do peat bog restoration, grip blocking, which is like the small drains and ditches have had on the uplands over the years. Every 10, 15, 20 metres to block them, so you have small dams, which slows down the water flow in times of heavy rainfall. Ancient hay meadow restoration, native tree species promotion, the spag and moss restoration, all this is for holding water. Heather regeneration. And when you get onto some of the things where it affects the actual people, you've got thousands of hours of volunteering. You've got rural skills and training. It attracts other government grants for specific schemes, which goes not just to ONB, but directly to landowners and farmers. And this is a review after 14 years of not having an increase, and this is going to 10% increase in reviewed in 3 years. So, but the two important things is that this 25% funding that goes to the ONBs from the local authorities, the 75% from DEFRA is dependent on that. If the councils don't stump up, DEFRA doesn't stump up. So, is it value for money? As time goes on with the Green Agenda, it's excellent value for money. For every pound that the local authorities put in, you get many, many pounds back.
Thank you. I'd also make the point that it's probably value for money in terms of rural regeneration and the rural economy as well, because unless we protect those natural assets, you know, then the whole attraction of those rural areas will go. Eileen, you had a question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's just a comment. Actually, if they've never had an increase since 2007, it's not that bad at all, to be fair, right? Especially when you think over the past, well, year and a half even, the impact that the people have had on the coastal areas recently, you know, all the extra footfall and everything, and even this year, the staycations and everything, I think that's not a bad amount of money, to be fair, really.
Yeah, and I think the council's budget's in a reasonably healthy state, and we can definitely afford £3,700 extra. So that's great. Thank you. So are we all happy to recommend approval for this? Thank you. Is that a question, or you?
Yeah, if I could just say that I think this committee should not only just accept its approval, but show its support. I don't know how that can be done to full council, but we should show our support for this work as well as just approval.
Yeah, what normally happens is when the committee considers a pre-scrutiny report, is that a note will go from this meeting to the Cabinet when it sits down on the 13th of July. And I'm quite happy to include that the committee actually supports the proposals as well as the recommendations in the report. If that's acceptable with the committee, I'll certainly make that note.
That's great. Okay, we'll support it then. Thank you. So thank you very much, David.
Right. Well, thanks. I really appreciate your support as well as your approval. So thank you.
Thank you. So the next item is the some changes to the complaints policy to deal with sort of persistent and vexatious complainants. And Julie is going to speak to this. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's nice to see everyone in person for a change. Okay, so I'm here to talk about the unreasonably persistent and vexatious contact policy. I would like to just stress that this is not a new policy. It's actually replacing the habitual contact policy that's been in place since 2010. What we've actually taken the opportunity to do is look at and refresh the suite of corporate policies around complaints and contact. This particular policy provides monitoring, oversight and coordination of all actions that will be taken under the policy. It provides support to residents to ensure that we are doing everything we can to ensure that they can access our services, that they have the right to raise concerns and they have the right to have those investigated. But what it does do is provides a level of protection to staff to ensure that they are allowed to carry out their role as intended. The reason for the change of the name to the policy, within the complaints community, it's widely accepted that individuals that are persistent would fall a lot under this category. What we need to do as an organisation is ensure that there's genuine reason, if there's a genuine reason for a complaint to be made, that we are doing everything we can to get the best outcome of looking into that. If we've you know, if there's something that needs to be changed or improved, that we take that forward, and we don't assume that because somebody's unhappy with the outcome of their complaint, we deem them unreasonable. So the policy is actually in line with the Ombudsman Standards of Good Practice, which is another reason why we've refreshed it. It's in line with benchmarking of other local authorities. Also, what we've provided in this particular policy is a criteria checklist. What this actually, I mean, every case is based on a case-by-case basis. There's individual needs, requirements and considerations that we would need to consider. What we have done as an extra line of reassurance within this policy is provide a check and balance almost for both myself as the Head of Complaint Services and the Monitoring Officer to work together to ensure that the criteria has been covered in the policy. You'll see that there's a checklist, and what this actually does, although we do look on a case-by-case basis, it just allows individuals to just think about the situation a little differently. Just because, you know, a complaint can be quite difficult, we need to just stop and think about, have we met the needs of the individual? Is there a way that we can look at this slightly different? Are we providing all the support that we should be to the resident? And just allows us to explore all the options that are available to us. I will just stress as well that it would be a very rare occurrence to undertake some of the actions in this policy. It's almost a last resort. We'd like to try our best to support staff and residents throughout this process, and hopefully with the steps that are detailed in the criteria, that would allow us to come to a mutually agreeable resolution without having to implement the policy. In a nutshell.
That's very comprehensive. Thank you very much. I'll just ask Richard, as the Cabinet Member, whether you have any comments you want to add before we open it up for questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a member of the public, prior to 2017, I think that I could reasonably have fallen under or victim of misuse of a policy like this if we weren't careful. And so I hope that you find, when you consider this report, that there's enough of a sort of safe guards in it that doesn't happen. What we don't want is for members of the public ever to find that they're exposing some form of council incompetence or anything like that, only to be shut down because it's inconvenient. That's really critical. You know, we value criticism and feedback from the public in all its forms. And this really must be limited to a very small handful of people who are malicious or vexatious in their nature and will not take the correct feedback as being in the spirit that it's intended. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a really important safeguard. Gordon.
Yes, can it be clarified, please? Is this entirely an officer decision as to which route to follow? Is this entirely managed by officers? Is there a political input at all from members?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. It is ultimately a decision that would come down to the officers. However, we would ensure that if you read through some of the criteria, what we would do is involve any individuals that we feel would be pertinent to that decision. So although it's not dictated actually in the policy, as part of our practice, we would make sure that anybody that would need to know would actually need to know. We also need to consider confidentiality issues as well. So again, it would be judged on a case-by-case basis, but wherever possible and wherever we feel it would be beneficial, we would involve you in that decision. I will just add as well, in my career, in my 25-year career of being a complaints manager, I've only ever had to follow the vexatious policy and implement extreme measures on 2 occasions. And that's in local authorities and NHS trusts. So I think the steps that we have in this policy really do assist in ensuring that we're really making the right decision if it comes to that, and that everyone involved is actually brought on board with that decision.
Thank you. Yes, I can only think of one example in my many years, 12 years and 15 years on the council, but it was bad enough when it happened. Yep, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Richard, you wanted to come in with a point there.
Yes, thank you. I think, Gordon, just to stress, that was literally the first question I asked, because that's not something that you want necessarily to... You need some form of democratic scrutiny and so on. And so when we asked officers about this, when this has come to an informal meeting of Cabinet to have a look at this initially before it came to scrutiny, the question was, what member involvement was there in making any of these decisions? It is ultimately an officer decision as far as the policy is set out, but what was said, and I have had experience of this in the past, is that there will be some consultation with either the relevant member of the Cabinet, the leader or the deputy leader, to say we're having to take this extraordinary position with a particular member of the public, so we want you to be aware of it, because it is, by the nature of it, extraordinary, and it shouldn't be happening on anything other than the most exceptional of circumstances.
And I think also there's a report that comes annually on, it must be at least annually, on the complaints. So presumably any action taken under this policy could be included in that report.
Absolutely,
so that we
absolutely.
get a chance to scrutinise it at that point.
It would be anonymised, obviously, for obvious reasons, but if anybody was, if action was to be taken, it would be notified within the complaints report in terms of numbers, etc. And if, obviously, anyone who needed any additional information, I'd be happy to meet with them and discuss that separately.
Thank you. So I think I saw another hand. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, this would be probably a bit of a grey area, but I'm just thinking a little bit outside the box here. It's on the very last page, and it's the last bullet point. Where a complaint is closed and the complainant persists on communicating about the same issue, it may be decided to terminate contact with the complainant, right? Which is fine. But what if it is a really, really genuine issue and they cannot get the point across to you, and then for some reason it doesn't go all according to plan and you close the complainant down? What route has that complainant got? You know, is there another route that could go through for help? Because some people just don't always get the point across properly.
Yep.
You know, and I just think that's a little bit of a grey area to close it down completely without it being looked at by an outside body or an outside something. What happens in that case?
I think that's a really good question, actually. And sometimes, because I've been in the business for as long as I have, I probably assume that everyone knows the processes that we follow. So it might be useful to know that as part of my role, we're looking at a whole refresh of the way that individuals provide feedback, the policies, etc. So with regards to corporate complaints, we have 2 stages. So we have a stage 1 response. If the individual remains unhappy with that response or feels that we haven't addressed all the issues that they've raised, they can then approach us and we'll escalate to a stage 2. Stage 2 tends to be someone that wasn't involved in the initial complaint response. It can be, it's difficult, it is on a case-by-case basis, so we would look at the circumstances. We could have someone independent, depending on the complexity of the complaint, so again they would have the opportunity to raise any concerns they have. If at stage 2, I would like to think that they've had the opportunity through all those steps to be able to communicate with us. If at the end of stage 2 they still remain unhappy, they can approach the local government ombudsman. We work very closely with the ombudsman. They would contact us and we would provide them with any information that they needed to support their investigations. And if the ombudsman feels that the individual hasn't had an opportunity, they'll raise it with us. They're very thorough. But I'd like to think that throughout the process it's that robust that individuals would have the opportunity to raise their complaints. I also think it's really important that the investigating officers looking into the concerns get to see the original letter if the complainant's happy, rather than we wouldn't never bullet point it and send it to someone to investigate, because quite often you can get a feel for what the actual issues are by reading it in its entirety. I think complaints are a very complex thing to deal with, You have a lot of emotions attached to concerns. They're not black and white. It can be incredibly difficult to get to the bottom of what the actual issue is. So another thing that we're looking to do is to centralise the complaints team, so that I would have a team of individuals, specialist to the complaints service. If it was a particularly grey area complaint, or we felt that the individual was struggling to get the point across, we would make sure we have very detailed conversations with that individual. Thank you. Okay.
That's great. And Richard, did you have a comment there?
Yeah, I did. I mean, first of all, we obviously, as you can see by the answer by officers to the questions, you've got an incredibly competent and capable officer team here. I mean, just going back to that question about if you're not satisfied with the problem and yet you're not getting the answer. I mean, I remember this question arising around Morpeth school places in the run-up to the elections in 2017, and I was in correspondence with the then chief executive. And eventually it got to a point where he just said, I'm not going to correspond with you any further on this. And I think my reply was, well, I'll pick it up with you on May the 5th. But the more serious point is we do need to make sure that, that there's opportunity for people to make sure that they go through this route and to make sure that they understand that there is a complaints route. All I can pledge from my side is if people are unsatisfied, I'll make sure that the proper process has been gone through alongside officers, which I'm sure it will be. And, you know, no system will ever be perfect, but this will be about as perfect as we can get. It's in line with what is done across the country and with the position of the Ombudsman, and ultimately the final recourse, of course, rests with the Ombudsman. If people aren't satisfied here, there is another route that they can take things to make sure that they've gone through every route available to them.
That's great. I think those safeguards are really important, but it is also worth noting that occasionally you get members of the public who just don't like the answer, and that can take up a lot of officer time with things, you know, bouncing around between different departments and different people. So it's important to have a balance. But this is obviously a very comprehensive process. The steps are set out very clearly. So if there are no more questions, I think that kind of we've touched upon two things, and one is that member consultation is important before you reach the final stage. So that's probably a recommendation that we'd sort of put forward formally from this scrutiny committee, and that be with the portfolio holder or the leader or the deputy leader, in this case the same person. Yeah, I think that's important. And I think the other area is that it gets covered in the annual report on complaints as well, so that we can review the progress and the feedback. So any other points? Okay, so we're happy to accept those recommendations. That's great. Thank you very much. So the next point is a report of the, it's our work programme. And I think, Sean, are you going to just quickly talk about this?
Right. So at every meeting of the committee, I bring forward the work programme as it is for the remainder of the year, and I always put the terms of reference on the front page, just so that you can sort of align that to the sorts of things that you're looking at. Now, what I've done on this occasion, because obviously it's the first meeting of a new administration, I've taken a number of issues that were requested by the previous committee. You know, could you ask the next committee to look at, you know, to continue to look at this or look at that? And so I have transferred onto your work programme for this year. That doesn't mean to say you have to accept it. It is your work programme. The work programme is set by the committee. It's not set by officers. It's not set by the administration. It's actually set by you as a committee. So it is your priorities. It is the issues that you want us to look at. So obviously scrutiny falls into two areas. You'll have noted that it's an overview and scrutiny committee. The overview is monitoring the services provided by the council and the issues that fall within the remit of this committee. When we talk about scrutiny, we're talking about decision making. We talk about decisions that have been made by the Cabinet or decisions to be made by the Cabinet. So we do sort of split the agenda into those. As the Chair pointed out at the beginning of the meeting, we talked about the forward plan. We do look at the forward plan and we do give members the opportunity to look at reports prior to determination. And I do take a lot of guidance from the portfolio holder and the officer who's written the report on whether or not there are actually options contained therein that may merit discussion and comment by the committee. I might also get the comment from them that it's purely a technical report and there's nothing meaningful that they believe that the committee can add to it. And I'm looking at Gordon there in the corner. I worked with Gordon a few years ago when he was chair of corporate services, and Gordon used to take the view that a lot of reports could actually go through without necessarily comment from scrutiny. But what he did like to see is perhaps that officer coming back, the portfolio coming back and say 6-9 months later to determine whether or not the issues that were promised, if you like, in that report have actually been able to deliver on. And if not, what tweaks need to be made in the original proposal to put it back on track. And that tended to work quite well in those days.
It did then, yes.
So, I mean, but that's an option. It's not just because it was a good idea for Gordon, doesn't mean to say it's a good idea for you, but it did work quite well in those days. But it's an option that the committee can exercise. You don't need to take everything from the Cabinet's forward plan to look at it. You might think, well, actually, we'll let it go and we'll pick it up later down the line. But that's your decision. It's the chair's decision. You tell me what you want to do, and I'll make those arrangements. So, going to the actual forward plan. What we try and do as far as possible is keep the agendas to about 3-4 items at the most. There's 5 in August, and I was I mean, the trouble is that when you set when I sat down and set this, there was only 3 items. But the draft housing strategy was supposed to be considered by Cabinet next week. It was deferred. That's why it's and that always happens. So when that happens, you look at the work programme and say, well, what can slip? You know, does everything have to be on the 4th of August? You've got another meeting at the end of August. Can we drop 1 or 2 of those items to that meeting? So it's a process. So whilst it's on here, what we're saying to the committee is, do you agree in principle that these are the issues that you want to look at? It might not come to you on the 4th of August. It might slip. But are you happy to look at them as a first principle? So that's that. But what I also try and do is I try not to go too far ahead of myself. So you can see that after the October meeting, it's fairly blank. And that really gives you the opportunity to say, actually, look at the terms of reference. There are a lot of things that we would like to look at as a priority. Can you somehow speak to the portfolio holder, speak to the officers and see what we can bring forward to the work programme later on in the year? And that also allows for slippage and other things coming through. I have also included the monitoring report, and that's from pages 6 onwards. That essentially is what the council, this committee has dealt with over the past 2 years, and it also gives you a flavour of the sorts of issues that have previously been dealt with, and that might inspire you or colour your judgment on the sorts of things that you want to pick up going forward. Or it may well be, as many of you are new councillors, that you feel as though there are issues that you wanted to bring forward yourselves, but now you can see that the committee have previously dealt with them. What you can do there is you can identify those reports to me, and I will make sure you get a copy if you want to satisfy yourselves that the issues that you thought were there have actually been dealt with. Or you might take the view, actually, there's still questions to be answered. Can we bring those reports to a future meeting. So look at the monitoring report, look at the issues I've identified from hangover from the previous year, but also look at the terms of reference and see whether or not there are anything in there that you want to bring forward. Notify the chair, the vice chair, or myself, and we'll see what can be done. Not everything's an issue for scrutiny. There may well be that you have queries. You know, you've heard rumours. Bring them to us. We'll see whether or not there is actually an issue there, and if there is an issue there, we'll put it onto your work programme. If there isn't, we'll get back to you and tell you what the answer is.
Thank you very much. So I'll just reiterate, if anybody has any suggestions or questions or whatever, please just email Mark and I and Sean. Gordon.
Yes, thanks. I do remember corporate scrutiny, but also remember being on the working group that set the subsidy levels for public transport for buses. And to me, my mind, it's an important subject. I note it's going to Cabinet quite soon, and this is of some importance, public transport having taken a severe beating during COVID in some respects. It's now trying to climb back to where it should be, and I'm really curious about this. And I notice on our terms of reference as an issue, public transport, how would we stand in keeping watch on what the Cabinet's deciding here? I'm curious about what it actually is.
Right, well, I asked that question in anticipation. It's the start of a process. And I asked the question, is it something that needs to come to scrutiny beforehand, or is it something that scrutiny needs to get involved with throughout the process, leading up to there's a lot of consultations that need to be gone into and what have you. The feedback I've had from the officer is actually scrutiny are better involved in the process later on down the line, but it doesn't fall within your committee. It's actually corporate services. It's strategic transport.
I just noted here in our terms of reference, public and community transport network.
Well, yeah, I mean, you'll also remember we have a chairman's group, and you'll remember that your oppo at the time was Glenn, and you were never afraid to trade items between the two of you. So, what we do in those sorts of occasions is, if this committee want to lay claim to a particular issue, we take it to chairman's group and we'll say to David Bourne, are you happy for committees in place to look at it rather than yourself? It may well be that corporate services want it, and that's what chairman's group does. Chairman's group will look at an issue and determine whose work programme it best sits on.
Thank you. It's early days. I don't early to make decisions, I think, of that nature. But yes, thank you for that explanation.
Thank you, Gordon. I was going to raise the same question. I think there's a few of us in the room from more than one party representing rural wards, and we've all got an interest in rural buses and rural transport. So we'll have a duel with David Bourne in the car park to see who gets this. But I'm very keen that this does get scrutinised.
Yeah, can I just tell you, because I did refer to Chairman's Group, and I should perhaps explain what Chairman's Group is. Chairman's Group meets probably once a month or every 2 months, and it's really an opportunity for the Chairman and Vice Chairman of the 4 scrutiny committees to get together, to look at issues coming forward, to look at things on each other's work programmes perhaps, to speak to the business chair about the priorities not only of the committees themselves, but also the administration, and see how scrutiny can get involved in looking at issues, before they become, cabinet issues, so that you can form a view or have the opportunity to make comment before issues are formalised. But also it gives the opportunity if an issue falls within 2 different committees, which committee takes it. So we would have a conversation, and you've already made your point, and the chair's made his view. So that discussion would happen in chairman's group, and then you will see whose work programme it falls on, following that discussion.
Great, thank you. Eileen, I think you had a question. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, just 2 or 3 points. Sean took the words out of my mouth when he said there's 5 items on the agenda. It's too many in a group, right? And I've been on this committee too long to know that that's just ridiculous, right? I do think sometimes reports could come through as a read-only document, and if anybody has any issue after they've read it, to just bring it forward, you know. That's one of the ways forward. Regarding the chairs group, I was going to mention that as well, because I have brought up the dogs and dogs going into gated sports areas a few times, and I don't think it's actually getting to chairman's group yet. So I'm pleased today I've had the opportunity to bring that up again, because believe you me, you know me, and I will nip away with it until I get it to chairs group, and then we get something done. You know, so I'm really pleased that you've taken that on board today. And I do think, yes, because we do have new councillors here, and from different parties as well. First time we've had a Green Party member. New ideas could come through. So we're not just looking at the same things year on year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no,
and the work programme belongs to you.
Yeah.
I mean, I've picked up some issues from the previous committee, and I've included their modern report, but that's neither here nor there. The work programme belongs to this committee and this group of members.
So what about if we've got some of the documents for a read-only document? How would you feel about that if they were a read-only document, and then we could, if we had an issue then, and you know, when this document comes, say, right, well, it's a read-only document, Appendix A, has anybody got any issues with this? Anybody want any clarification? Would that be a way forward or not?
The issue we have there is that a lot of the cabinet documents, unless this committee requests it, tend not to be available when the agenda for this committee goes out. And that's another thing you might have to rely on your chair and vice chair a bit more on, about getting perhaps not the final draft, but a sort of pretty substantial synopsis of what the report is, and whether or not there's some sort of mechanism. I mean, what we could do, if you wished, is to provide the committee with a schedule of decisions taken by Cabinet, so that, you know, it would be too. Sometimes you wouldn't have the report in time. You would only have a brief synopsis of what's on the forward plan to make a judgment. That's why we have a chair and vice chair and a sort of a scrutiny officer to work on your behalf to determine whether or not there's something in there. On the other side of it, if they decide, the chair, vice chair decide that actually an issue is not necessarily for the scrutiny committee, it can then be passported directly to Cabinet. What we could then do is give you an assurance that when the Cabinet have decided that issue, that I provide you with a draft minute of how it was dealt with.
That's not really what I'm on about though, Sean. What I'm on about is you've got 5 things here on this report to be scrutinised, right?
Yeah.
Now, when I used to run the working group, I used to tend to give an officer, say, 10 minutes to actually read that report. Sometimes the report goes on for such a long time being read out, right? What I'm saying is, if some of these reports were a read report and the officer comes to the committee, by the time we come to scrutiny, we should have read that report anyway. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Well, that's a meeting management issue, because what we always say to officers is assume the members have read the reports. Don't read the report verbatim. Assume that the members have read the reports, and we have a briefing with the officers beforehand, and to tease out the main issues, and we try and obviously keep them to that. I mean, obviously the presentation today were quite short, but then what we can't do is we can't manage the questions that the members have. And it may well be that we keep the officers down to 5 minutes, and then you keep going for half an hour. So
there's committees, so in the past, in other workplaces that I've worked at, it's a read-only report, so you actually read it, and even an officer might not do that, and then the chair will say, has anybody got any comments on this report?
Yeah.
And sometimes that's quite quick, because sometimes these
scrutiny,
things
though?
come through committee time after time again.
I think what what we should do is basically we'll work on the assumption always that people have read all of the reports, and we'll try and keep the presentations to a sort of a minimum in terms of the salient points and any potentially contentious issues. And then we'll, allocate most of the time for proper scrutiny and proper questioning. In terms of the meeting next month, I think the Active Northumberland Annual Outcome Report is probably one that we could have very little presentation, if any, on, because it's happened, it's history, it's too late to change it. And actually what we should be focusing on is the Active Northumberland Service Plan and their post-COVID recovery plan. So that sort of thing. And then I wonder whether the curbside glass one could be pushed forward to a later meeting possibly, or, but we'll discuss that with Sean and come up with, but I accept your point. We need manageable meetings that can be, allocate time for proper scrutiny.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions?
I should also say, though, talking about Chairman's Group and issues that you've raised in the past, that not everything belongs to the Scrutiny Committee. It could well be that the Chairman's Group take the view that something's best dealt with by one of the local area councils. Oh, yes. And it may well be that the issue that you've raised, they may feel as though we'll take it to the local area councils first, see what the general view is before putting it through the system. I'm not saying that's what they would do, but that's a potential outcome.
Great. Okay, final item agenda is urgent business, if any, and nobody's... Sorry.
Chair, just to add to what you said there, that, I'm very pleased to be put in as Vice Chair of this committee, but I'm open to all members to contact us. My phone's always on for ideas of what you want this committee to look at. So just to add to what you said there, that, you can contact us at any time.
That's great. Thank you very much. And there are no urgent items, so that's the meeting closed. And I think we could probably switch off the live stream now. Thank you.